Listening to the Ancient Echoes of Scriptural Wisdom by Harold W. Anderson, Part 3. This continues my review of Brueggemann's Ancient Echoes, starting with the seventh distortion of the religious and far right. The seventh claim is that inequality's not so bad. Ancient echoes resonate from the gospel text condemning this claim. Based upon a commitment to the common good, the Gospels anticipate a radical socioeconomic reversal of last first and first last, and exalted humbled and humbled exalted, end quote. Such anticipation, however, finds firm footing in the ancient echoes of the Hebrew sacred texts, which recall the enslavement endured by Hebrew slaves in Egypt. When the Hebrew people were enslaved, they lived in a hierarchical society defined by the court. Their location on this hierarchy, which was very near the bottom, defined their value and worth. The court enjoyed the privileges and luxury of their riches, while the Hebrews suffered the injustices of a prejudiced and rigged system. The court grew fat on its abundance, while the slaves starved on the pitiful food they were given and died due to the treacherous workplace they must endure. The court was benefited from the hierarchy while being pampered by slaves, while the slaves were beaten, tortured, and sometimes killed by their so-called masters. It was this enslavement by Egypt that would become an institutional memory meant to guide the Israelites in their treatment of immigrants and the marginalized populations of society. They were not to enslave, they were to liberate. They were not to alienate, they were to accept others as neighbors. The memory faded in the court of Solomon. Rather than remembering their unfair treatment by Egypt, Egypt's hierarchy became the model for the Solomon court. What a shocking travesty that Solomon, who was supposed to represent the grace of God to the people, became the one who reminded them of the Pharaoh. The bread that sustained the Israelites in their journey to liberation now filled the mouths of the privileged few. It was not supposed to be that way. The blessing of God is meant for all people, not just the court, the rich, and the powerful. It is not for the entitled, but God's blessings are given to all for the nourishment of their bodies and the replenishment of their souls. In the liberation of Israel and in the court of Solomon, we are presented with two modes of bread. Brueggemann writes, quote, Israel stands before this bread and must always decide again. There is the bread of heaven given daily that makes for community, and there is the bread of production that can be stored as surplus and distributed according to the whims of the powerful, end quote. If the former, all will eat equally. If the latter, many will suffer from scarcity. This echo is also heard in the writing of Paul, who notes, quote, the one who had much did not have too much, and the one who had little did not have too little, end quote. Echoed elsewhere in the Christian scriptures, the lesson for those who profess to walk a life of faith, to practice justice, and to love others as their neighbors is that when inequality is not so bad, as the right might contend, they betray that which they profess. In the words of the Johannine text, the truth is not in them. If we listen to the echoes and make these whispers the inspiration of our lives, we realize that God's bread is meant for all with no qualification. The eighth and final claim is that universal health care is tyranny. Ultimately, Brueggemann holds this implies that those who are needy do not deserve good health care because they are undeserving. Echoes from 2 Kings 5 speaks to this claim. This echo involves Elijah, an uncredentialed person not descended from a notable family, but a person capable of evoking great social transformation. He was, Brueggemann tells us, quote, gifted with an uncommon capacity for evoking well-being in a variety of difficult circumstances, end quote. Elijah is the prophetic personality pitted against the court in northern Israel, a court unable to evoke the same sense of well-being in the people. 2 Kings 5 tells the story of Naaman, a military officer in Syria. Unfortunately, Naaman's might as a great warrior was being jeopardized by leprosy, a highly infectious disease that was not only dangerous to the community, but because of that was alienating to the leper, who is branded as unclean and relegated to isolation. A central moment in this narrative is when a young Israelite girl, a captive of war, comes to the aid of the officer by telling him of Elijah and his healing powers. With the permission of the king, Naaman journeys to Israel with a sizable entourage, complete with riches and treasures. The officer's intent was to buy the admiration of the king, whom he hoped would facilitate his healing. However, the king had no healing powers and saw the officer as a threat, turning the officer away, who then seeks out Elijah. The officer expected contrition. What he got was apathy. Unimpressed by the military leader, Elijah simply told him to immerse himself in the Jordan River 7 times and he would be healed. After the wounded ego of the military leader was assuaged by his compatriots, the leader complied, and he was healed. While Elijah was not impressed, the military leader was. He was jubilant. Following his healing, he became a convert to the Hebrew God and offered to pay Elijah for his services, but Elijah's response to his offer is interesting. Elijah says, quote, "As the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing." The military leader urged him to accept, but Elijah refused, end quote. Elijah takes no credit for the healing. It was God who healed him, and all credit must be attributed to God. Healthcare, Brueggemann points out, is too often connected with money. But Elijah knew that the key to good health was not money, nor was it due to Elijah. Rather, good health care is a gift from God and should be treated as such. Because of this, health care dare not be something enjoyed solely by the rich and powerful. Like the saving grace of God, it is something that should be enjoyed by all. Or, as Brueggemann puts it is some distance from Elijah's free gift of health care to publicly financed health care among us, or as it is polemically termed, socialized medicine. Those who easily benefit from monetized health care are readily able to call a free offer of such care as tyranny. But to all others, such free health care, publicly financed, is simply the practice of the community caring for its own and mobilizing its common resources for that care for all. The ancient echo concerning the public nature of healthcare is not restricted to 2 Kings, but also echoes in the words of Jesus, Paul, the Johannine texts, and the preaching of the early church. Healthcare is not something that should be restricted to only the rich and powerful. It is a gift from God and available to all, but it is the court that hoards. Or, as Brueggemann concludes, the regulatory authorities serve those who benefit from control, who lock out people from the kingdom of heaven, that is, from the common good of the community. Monetization is an effective model of lockout. Such norms and requirements keep the disadvantaged from adequate participation in the blessings of the common good. A monetized healthcare system is an effective lockout. Those who do so are yet again and always addressed by the woe of the Lord of well-being, who intends that none should be locked out of the basic resources for life and well-being. The ancient echoes are echoes of life. The control of the court brings only death. If then we follow the echoes and turn away from the mandates of the court, we will discover our own 8 responses to the court. They are, number 1, the possibility of good governance. Number 2, the uneasy gift of newness, and the embrace of diversity. Number 3, responsible faith and responsible science have no need for contradiction. Number 4, truth is that upon which the pillars of faith are established, a truth that cannot succumb to the fantasy of conspiracy theories and lies. Number 5, the ancient echoes of the prophetic faith endlessly insist upon justice, righteousness, compassion, steadfast love, and faithfulness. No amount of private gain or private property will substitute for that, nor will it provide of itself the requirements of a sustainable political economy. Number 6, self-sufficiency is an illusion because we are always part of a larger community upon which we rely for our well-being. Quote, the plain truth is that our lives are a gift, and we are dependent upon a host of givers. The only appropriate response to this recognition is gratitude that makes for generosity. End quote. Number 7, bread shared by all the eaters. Says Brueggemann, the Bible is preoccupied long before Karl Marx with the problem of haves and have-nots, of the legitimate claims of the have-nots, and the dangers of the haves who possess in excess. While some inequality is not only inescapable but bearable, the extremes of inequality featuring greed in policy and in practice are irresponsible and cannot end well for our society. End quote. Number 8, healing without money, without price. Writes Brueggemann, I have laid out a case for universal health care. Healing is not a private property. It is a practice that participates in the generous promise of the Creator as human agents work for a common well-being. To imagine that support for those life resources should be doled out in accordance with money is a ludicrous mockery of the way of the Creator. Indeed, the wisdom tradition has well seen that the dismissal of care for a needy neighbor is an affront to the reality of God. Those who mock the poor insult their Maker. Those who are glad at calamity will not go unpunished. End quote. Brueggemann wrote his book before Trump was elected for a second term. Since his first day in office, Trump has demonstrated his disdain for the rule of law, the independent bodies of Congress, and he tells lie after lie, demanding loyalty to himself rather than the Constitution. His attempts to alienate immigrants, attack birthright citizens, and pass draconian executive policies are clear evidence that he has nothing but disdain for the poor and marginalized folks for whom the Bible demands our care and compassion. This puts him at odds with the ancient echoes that whisper from the pages of Scripture. He, like the court, denies the God of creation, and if one listens to the prophetic warnings, his contempt will bring his presidency to a horrible, painful, and cataclysmic end, but only after millions have suffered and died. It does not need to be this way. If we listen to the ancient echoes of Scripture and live by their words, it does not have to be this way. Things can be different. Take heart. Let the echoes of life become your ways, and truth and justice will prevail. Quote, when justice is done, writes the poet, it is a joy to the righteous, but terror to the evildoers. End quote. Things can and will be different.